I won't shy away from calling it what it is: far-right thuggery.
In the aftermath of riots in the UK, fueled by misinformation about migrants and Muslims, the debate about racism and integration has once again taken centre stage. About over a decade now, but your views are very different, I would argue, to what they were when I knew you back in the UK, here in 2011, 2012, 2013, when many would say you were a champion of diversity, multiculturalism, immigrants, Muslims. You were calling out the far right. Your critics now say, Matt, that you have become, quote, a part of the right populist movement you once sought to explain, that you've gone native with them, that, quote, instead of writing about the radical right, you've become part of it. So let me start tonight by asking, what happened to you?
Well, as somebody once said, when the facts change, I change my opinion. And over the last 15 years, I've become convinced that mass immigration is a failure, one of the biggest disasters in recent public policy. I think the elites in Western countries have fundamentally lost touch with the voters in those countries. And I think that unless we change course quickly, we're going to have some really big problems.
A lot of people sympathise with that view, of course. Although over the summer, we saw a very extreme, violent opposition to immigration. The UK saw horrific race riots, sparked by the murder of 3 young girls in the town of Southport. We saw mosques and asylum hotels attacked, police officers attacked, over 1,000 people arrested. In a post for your Substack, you called the people at those riots, quote, ordinary people who feel like they're losing their country and trying to, quote, exercise their voice. It sounded to a lot of your critics that you were justifying those riots, these horrific racist riots. We just had an election in this country in July. That's how you exercise your voice in a democracy, not via rioting when you don't get your way at the ballot box.
Well, protest has always been part of our political DNA, and obviously everybody would disassociate themselves from the criminality and the violence in the summer. I certainly wrote about it, I condemned it. But as Mark Easton and other liberal commentators at the time noted, there were also ordinary people protesting about what has been happening to their country. And that isn't just about mass migration, it's also about the breakdown of borders, it's about feeling unsafe in their own community, in their own country. And for people who engage in violence, they should have been rounded up and sent to prison, as many of them were. But there were lots of peaceful protesters at those events as well. And the polling afterwards, Mehdi, was quite revealing. Over 60% of Brits said, yes, I blame the people who engage in violence, but actually 63% said, I blame recent government immigration policy for these protests. And what I was trying to do in that piece is to say, look, there is clearly a lot more going on here than these idiots and morons who are trying to set fire to a hotel or attack a mosque. What we have in this country is a social fabric that is breaking down, and we need to talk about it.
There was mixed polling. I mean, YouGov also found that the protests, even the protests, were only supported by 1 in 3 Britons, 34%. In fact, only 1 in 6 said that people causing unrest had legitimate concerns. It's interesting that you say you condemn the violence, but in your big Substack post on the riots, you only condemned the violence against the police. You did not condemn the violence against Muslims, Asians, the attack on a mosque in Southport. There was not one word from you about that, and you wrote a 2,000-word piece.
Well, I'm sure I did at the time, and I condemn it now. I think nobody in their right mind would say that was somehow excusable. But clearly, what was going on there was a bit like during the BLM protests in 2020. We had a national conversation about the legitimate injustices that underpin those protests. It did result in the injury of 30 police officers and lots of unrest in America, as you know better than me. Cities like Portland were largely devastated by protests and anarchism. But yet we still had this mature conversation about what is going on here.
But just to be clear, the Black Lives Matter protests were not like this. 90% of the protests in the US, according to one academic study, showed they were peaceful. There was no comparison. Even Priti Patel, not known as a kind of liberal, muesli-eating, sandal-wearing leftist, hardcore right-wing Home Secretary under the Conservatives, said there's a clear difference between that and then. She says what we saw during the pandemic protests, the BLM protests, was protest. This is a complete distinction. This is burning down of places of worship, thuggery, violence, racism.
Okay, but the issue is, For lots of people, what these events became was a proxy for this underlying issue that we've never in this country been able to get on top of, which is we promise the British people one thing, which is control and lower migration, and then we do another. Priti Patel's an interesting example. You say she's hard right, I'd say she's the most pro-immigration Home Secretary we've ever had in this country. Now, if you're a Conservative voter in Northern England, you were promised in 2019 lower migration, lower overall numbers, and a high-skilled policy. And then the government that you elected gives you the absolute opposite of that, puts everything on steroids and says to hell with you. You're going to be frustrated and you're going to be angry.
I just want to deal with these riots issues, because you say you condemn it now. You didn't condemn it in your post. You even wrote sympathetically, Matt, about a woman who went to prison in the UK because, according to you, quote, she wrote something very offensive on Facebook and you objected to that. Can you tell us what she said?
Yeah, she was a full-time carer for her husband, and she wrote something along the lines of they should blow up this mosque, and I think she said something hideous. People,
yeah, blow the mosque up with the adults in it. You don't think that merits a prison sentence?
If somebody writes something on social media in their own home, however offensive I might find it, I don't think they should go to prison. That's my personal
You don't think people
view.
can incite violence by social media? It doesn't matter whether she's in her home. She's inciting violence.
If it's clear incitement, they should be in prison. What I saw
blow the mosque up with adults in it.
She also
is that clear incitement?
She also very quickly deleted it. She expressed sorrow. I believe in Christian notions of forgiveness. If somebody says, I'm sorry, I say, give you a second chance.
Do you know how many Muslims have gone to prison over the last 20 years for saying much less than that on social media?
Well, I can disagree with that. It's the same principle as non-crime hate incidents. I think what we're living through is an Orwellian imposition from above that I think lots of people in this country, the home of individual liberty, common law, Magna Carta, repel against. I'm one of them. I don't think we should be doing that.
Here's what really bothered a lot of people about your post, and actually really undermines, I would argue, one of the key arguments you make in your books. You say we should treat people as individuals. Don't become obsessed with group identities, ethnic identities, racial identities. And yet you wrote about the guy accused of murdering these 3 little girls, that he was the son of immigrants from Rwanda. Why is it relevant that the suspect is the British son of Rwandan immigrants?
He ultimately was a product of migration. He was a second-generation migrant. We know from a lot of research that cultural practices, traditions, values, different ways of life tend to pass down from first to second, third generation. We know he came from a very conflict-ridden society, Rwanda.
We have no idea what his motivation is. The police don't know. What do you know that they know?
Well, one of those potential motivations, let's see what happens.
But why didn't you wait to see what happens before you made a kind of slur against Rwandan immigrants?
Because the fact is, this ultimately was a symbol. I think.
How is it a symbol? It's got nothing to do with his parents, unless you have some evidence that the police don't have.
As I said in the original piece, for many Brits, what happened in the 12 days of that hot summer, we saw young British Muslim lads assaulting police officers in Manchester airport. We saw young second-generation lad stabbing a British Army officer almost
What's that got to do with your description
because
of the
just hear me out. In the course of a week, we saw the Southend machete gangs, mass violence. We had the riots in Leeds. We had evidence of communalism in other parts of the country. We had sectarianism at the general election just a month before.
In your opinion?
With independent,
facts? This is your opinion?
Well, for lots of Brits, when you put that together and you look at the course of those things, I think what 2024 will come back to be seen as was really a watershed moment in our debate over...
I understand, but you're avoiding the question, Matt.
No,
You are.
I'm coming to the central point,
well, please, deal with the child of Rwandan immigrants. I want to nail this down.
Is Britain an integrated society? And do the people who are coming
What evidence do you have? You seem to be implying all sorts of things
well, I think it's,
we know nothing about.
Well, I think going out and doing a mass stabbing and going on
a mass stabbing is very British. Sorry to break it to you. A lot of British people do stabbings and killings. This kid was a Brit. Is a Brit. Or is he not a Brit to you?
It depends how you define national identity.
Wow. So am I not a Brit?
No, I think it's, do you respect the country that you live in, and do you follow the rule of law?
So it's a conditional citizenship?
It's not conditional.
You just said it depends on whether you respect the country you live in. For somebody who doesn't want to judge people on group identities, why are you bringing up the parents of this kid? Do you have any evidence?
We have lots of evidence.
You do?
Social science has lots of evidence that the second, third generation migrants bring over certain cultural habits, traits, practices.
Murder.
No, but for example, second generation British Muslims, for example, will express higher levels of religiosity.
He wasn't Muslim. That's part of the problem.
No, but the underlying point...
No, because you're dodging the point here. This guy was the son of Rwandan immigrants, and you cannot explain to this audience why you thought it was relevant to bring that up.
I've just explained.
Because Muslims bring communal practices.
No, I've said I think it's obviously about immigration. He is a product of immigration.
That had nothing to do with it, as far as we know. We don't, but you're the one making the claim,
I'm saying, in the context of that week, there are lots of questions to ask about to what extent was this
So don't
guy
ask the
integrated
questions,
into
don't
wider
make
society?
sweeping statements. Here's the problem, Matt. Your critics would say that you used to be an academic, you sat on the Conservative Coalition government's anti-Muslim hatred working group, you used to gather data, you used to analyse it in a sober way. Now they say you just go on the right-wing TV channel GB News, you write columns on the Daily Mail.
Oh, there's lots of left people on GB News.
You spout off, though, you cut corners. This is what they say, you push unfounded claims. You said on GB News, for example, falsely, and I quote, more than 50% of social housing in London is now occupied by people who are not British. This is not acceptable. Well, forget not being acceptable. It's not true.
I think it's about that. I think it's about 47, 48%.
It's not, actually. The percentage of people who are not British in London social housing is about 14%. No. 85% of people are British citizens.
No, so my view would be, in terms of housing, we're in the middle of a housing crisis. I think we should have a principle of national preference in our housing market.
We do. 85% of people in London are British who are in social housing.
No,
you falsely said that more than 50% are not British. That's false.
No, across the country, more generally.
Across the country, it's 90% according to the Ministry of Housing.
When we were allocating social housing, we also used to take into account things like commitment to the community, looking after property, etc. We don't really do that anymore.
That's a fair point. That's not what you said, though. I just want to go with what you said, Matt, with respect. More than 50% of social housing in London is now occupied by people who are not British. That is not true.
I'd need to look at the statistics.
We have the statistics. According to London government,
I also wrote
the figure in London is 84%. According to the 2021 census data, only 14% of Londoners living in social housing did not hold a UK passport. This has been pointed out to you for the last year.
No, it hasn't.
In fact, you went back on GB News and corrected it and said 48% go to people who are headed by people who are not born in Britain, which is a different point. But you would accept the vast majority of people in social housing are British.
I'd need to look at the data.
I've got the data.
No,
it's right
but
here.
the fact that 48, I think the 48,
copied and pasted.
I think the fact that 48% of social housing in this country has gone to families that are headed by somebody who was not born in the country is a problem.
So that's a different argument, with respect.
Well,
let's talk about that argument.
Well, let's have that.
No, let's have that argument. You were wrong on the first point.
I don't think I was wrong on the first
point. You're 100% wrong.
Well, I'd like to look at the data.
The Mayor of London, the census data.
I don't think the Mayor of London would be a credible source on that.
Okay, so the London government. The London government don't know who the... All right, how about
a highly political figure.
All right, how about the Ministry of Housing? 90% of social homes go to UK nationals. You're making some sweeping claims and they're wrong. You also said on right-wing channel GB News that I bet nobody knew this, but it's not a criminal offence to hire illegal immigrants in this country. That's not true either. You can be sent to jail for 5 years, according to the British government.
No, I don't think that's right. You can hire, under certain conditions, people that haven't got full-time.
If you didn't know, we checked with the Department of Justice. You can be sent to jail for 5 years if you're found guilty of employing someone who knew or had reasonable cause to believe did not have the right to work in the UK. What you said on GB News was just false.
Why, for example, have the French spent much of the last year saying that we are a soft touch when it comes to illegal migration?
Maybe the French, like you, didn't check the facts.
No, well, maybe. Who do I trust? I mean, French Interior Minister...
You trust the French Interior Minister over our own Ministry of Justice?
No, what I'm saying is
absurd.
It's very easy in the UK to game the system, a lot easier than it is in other European
Matt, I agree
countries.
with you, but that's a different point.
No, it isn't a different point.
It is, Matt. This is my whole point.
All of this
you could make legitimate arguments, but you don't. You say things that are flat false.
All of this is coming back to the central point, which runs through the riots, immigration, the rise of populism and so on, which is, firstly, do people feel safe in their own country? And secondly, do they
they should feel safe. Crime is at record lows.
Do they feel that this country treats everybody fairly? There is a widespread perception out there that this country does not treat people fairly. It treats newcomers more...
Maybe there's a widespread perception because they see people on TV who are professors giving false statistics about immigrants.
I don't think that's true. The ODR last week, as you know, the Office of Budget Responsibility, showed quite conclusively that low-wage, low-skilled, non-selective migration of the sort that we're now bringing into this country, largely because of decisions taken under the previous Conservative governments, is costing, for each low-skilled, low-wage migrant, £150,000 if they live to the age of 60, $500,000 if they live to the age of 80. Mass migration is not only taking more out of the economy
Hold on. You just jumped from low-skilled to mass migration. This, again, your critics say you
No,
did you read the report? Because you should be fair to this audience and say the same report said an average migrant worker pays more in tax than they receive in public services throughout their lives. You don't mention that.
Of all the visas,
cherry pick.
Of all the visas we gave out over the last 2 years, what percentage do you think went to high-skilled workers?
I don't know. You can tell me. I don't have to hand.
Do you not have the facts?
I mean, you're going to tell me, but then you were wrong about social housing, so I don't know if it's going to be correct.
13%.
Okay. But the British public want low-skilled workers, you know that, right?
No, they don't.
Yeah, they do. Ipsos Mori polling from earlier this year.
Well, you're making stuff up. I worked in this field for 15 years.
I mean, with respect, February 2024, Ipsos Mori polling, 51% of Brits want more doctors, 52% more want nurses. I'm getting there. A plurality, 4 in 10, want to see more care home workers, and 39%, another plurality, want to see more fruit.
4 in 10. It's not
plurality, more than are opposed. You know what a plurality is, right, Matt? You're a professor, I'm not.
I think Britain is a remarkably fair and tolerant country. Where I think we've gone wrong is we've been saying to people, we're going to give you a small amount of high-skill migration that will contribute to things like the NHS, maybe parts of social care, although we should be fixing the social care system ourselves. What we've instead done is we've liberalised the whole system, and we've now brought in lots of low-skill, low-wage migration, which is now taking more out of the economy. So everybody else has to pay more in tax than they would otherwise have to do. I think that's wrong. I think we need to be able to talk about it.
I agree, and I think economists do disagree on that.
No, they don't disagree.
They do, actually. Let's go to our panel. Zoe Gardner is an immigration policy expert, campaigner for migrant rights. Zoe, what's your reaction to what you've been hearing from Matt?
One of the things that you do is you muddy the waters about what we're talking about. So the last couple of years, yes, we've had historically very high rate of net immigration overall. All the evidence shows that's dropping off a cliff again now. However, you then go straight from that and talk all about small boats, and you call it an invasion. And the threat behind that inflammatory language is always about these big, big numbers. But last year, asylum seekers making the crossing across the channel on small boats made up 5.5% of immigration. I feel like maybe you're misrepresenting and distorting this issue, when in fact, the vast majority of the immigration to this country in the last few years that was high was driven by Ukrainians, Hong Kongers, students, and care workers. And we have had polling that looks at people's reaction to the plummeting numbers of health and social care workers that are coming to the country, and 67% of the country say that's bad news.
David Goodhart is here. David is head of the Demography, Immigration, Integration Unit at the think tank Policy Exchange. You're someone who's been critical of mass immigration also in recent years, including on this show previously. Were you worried to see the opposition to mass migration turn into what we saw it turn into in August? Did that shock you, stun you, concern you?
Yeah, of course it did. But I also think, as Matt has said, there are lots of different things motivating the people that took part. Quite a lot of the protesting was perfectly peaceful. It was ordinary families. There was a racist fringe involved. But we're talking about poor white people who are really pissed off and have lots of different reasons for being pissed off. Immigration becomes a sort of symbolic motivation for some of them, not all of them. And I think we need to sort of look at what is pissing people off. And there, there's deindustrialization, globalization, the erosion of national sovereignty, of which does
racism play a part in your analysis?
Well, I mean, we saw racism, expressed. It doesn't mean to say we become a racist country.
No, I didn't ask that. I just said racism in terms of opposition.
When it's still like 3% of people in Britain think you have to be white to be truly British. Only 5% of people would feel uncomfortable if an immigrant lived next door to them. We remain a very liberal country. 200,000 people said they opened their house to a Ukrainian.
Although, to be fair, 4 million people voted for a guy who said he doesn't want Romanians living next to him. But let me bring in Taj Ali, journalist, historian on South Asian activism in the UK. You reported on the riots yourself, I believe. What do you make of what you've heard just now from David and from Matt about
Well, I completely agree that we need to be tough on the causes of the riots. And the causes of the riots was racism, Islamophobia, and the demonization of ethnic minority communities. And it's been happening for a very long time. It's true that there are many pissed off white people. I live with those pissed off white people in Luton. I also live with poor black and Asian working class people who are always ignored from our definitions of what constitutes the working class. They also live in areas that have been devastated by deindustrialization, by austerity, and by cuts to public services. They don't go around attacking people who look different to them, or trying to burn down hotels housing refugees, or desecrating graves, or making sure that people like my mum and my sister who wear the hijab feel unsafe. I was hearing stories from people who were attacked on the streets. There was one woman in Belfast who was holding her baby and she was punched in the face. And yes, many of these people do live in very poor parts of the country. And I absolutely believe that we have to tackle the issues surrounding deindustrialization. We need to address material concern. We need to address poverty. And we also need to address radicalization of young white working class boys. And a lot of that radicalization is taking place by people like Tommy Robinson, Nigel Farage, and I'm afraid to say Matthew Goodwin as well.
Do you want to respond?
I think it's very easy just to look at what's going on within white working class communities. I mean, we do forget 1 in 3 black and minority ethnic voters opted for Brexit. But just look at where the riots were. There's a reason the riots were so intense in Rotherham, because in many of those communities, people had watched the systematic sexual exploitation of young white women at the hands of Pakistani Muslim gangs. So what I'd like to do is just push the morons to one side, go to prison if they try to attack a mosque or if they set fire to a hotel. I'm not interested in those people. Let's just get serious about the social fabric in this country and start dealing with the underlying issues that we have. Lower migration, fix the borders. You might not like the word invasion, Zoe. The definition of invasion is an unwanted incursion into one's territory. 139,000 people since 2018, some of whom are losing their lives.
What about Zoe's point about the boats, though? That you're cherry-picking the numbers again.
139,000.
No, you're obsessed with boats. I saw a photo of you in a boat.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. It's 5.5% of the numbers. Even if we were to stop all the boats tomorrow, you'd still be complaining about the other 94.5%.
What's the number one issue in the country right now?
And why is
it's immigration. Why is it? Because we're having a debate of immigration? No, it's because